Hey everybody, how's it going? You got Claytanick here for another commentary episode of the best art channel on YouTube. And what we're doing this week is this is a logo that I'm doing for a buddy of mine, Jason, who's doing a boiled peanut business. He's starting a little business venture. I love boiled peanuts, and I'm a big fan of my buddy Jason, so I decided to agree to do his logo for him. So we jumped right in. This is based off his idea. This is his premise, his brainchild, which is a good 90%, I would say, of any collaboration. The idea is a big part of it. And so I loved his idea, and I always enjoy collaborating with Jason. We collaborate well together. He kind of trusts the process, and he trusts me to do what I do, and he gives his ideas, and we just work well together. And that's a very vital step in any kind of collaborative art process. So it's something that you strive for in a client and artist relationship. So I'm doing this illustration in Adobe Illustrator this time. I knew that Jason wanted to have a table hang or some kind of large format output for this illustration. So I did this in vector art. Vector meaning you can blow it up to any size without any pixelization or image loss. And what I did is I'm using some brushes that I created, some custom brushes that I made myself. And I made these by just basically making a single dot that's more or less shaped like what a blob of ink would look like if you just dab the brush down on the paper. My goal with any kind of digital drawing medium is to mimic a brush. I always loved working in brush work, and over the years it's become kind of tougher and tougher to find the room and to find a studio space where I won't make a mess using physical media. I also just really enjoy using digital media, especially vector art is fun because you can manipulate the individual line segments and bend and move things around. I really enjoy object-oriented programs. For the most part, I work in raster art, when I'm doing my comic book work, but for my logo work and for anything that requires a kind of a polished, very finished look, very clean kind of approach, I go with Adobe Illustrator. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm bouncing mostly between this custom art brush that I made, this tapered, kind of digital sable style brush, to the pen tool. Here I'm using a feathered brush that I made, and I have a quick key or an action set up to, with a button, outline the stroke and turn it into a filled object that I can then go in with the eraser tool, which in a vector environment is basically kind of subtracting shapes more than it's actually erasing. Another thing I'm doing, which is might be kind of tough to see here, but I also intersect the shapes using the Pathfinder tool and get rid of those little kind of overhang objects. I intentionally draw through the line, if that makes sense, so that I can keep my pen strokes nice and smooth and freeform, and keep them from looking wiggly and trepidatious as they intersect the conjoining lines. And those are a lot of words that make sense to me, but might be nonsense in any other context. So here I'm using the same feathered brushes to create a white negative shape, and basically cutting into the big black shape there, almost reverse feathering. It's funny, working on this gave me a craving for both boiled peanuts and for reading Conan stories. I read some of them as a kid. I loved the Savage Sword of Conan comic. As a kid, I got a subscription in the mail. Every month, I would get a subscription from Marvel Comics for the Savage Sword of Conan. It was an oversized black and white pulp comic, based off Robert E. Howard's titular character Conan, and I loved them. They were gory and kind of inappropriate for a kid, so that made it more appealing. So I love Conan. I recently bought a collected edition of Robert E. Howard's Conan stories, so I'm looking forward to digging into that and reading those. I always thought that Conan was brilliant, beautiful, eloquent prose to describe just the most infantile ideas imaginable. It's Robert Howard was obviously a kind of a devotee or a big fan of Lovecraft. There's a lot of similarities with the prose and with the descriptive nature of the environments and the stories that he wrote. I'm looking forward to digging into that volume someday and just chilling out and relaxing and maybe enjoying some red wine and reading some Conan books. So anyway, at this point in the process, what I'm doing is I'm creating grayscale tones of the character. I'm basically just working on the shadow areas and trying to come up with good black and white contrast. Knowing in advance that I'm going to use the generative color function in Illustrator. And that's one of the more, that's one of the newest functions in Illustrator that is really a huge beneficial time saver. In a world where we've got generative art, which is, controversial and often brings up conversations about plagiarism, diminishing the value of human artists. I think that the generative color and generative fill elements in Photoshop are kind of helpful for us artists. They help us save time. They help us cut through the tedium of finding a good color palette. And so that's the way I utilized it here. I like to create work that's original and as represents as much of the artist's hand and the imagination as possible, while using the computer to make life easier. So it's all about a balance. At this point in the process, I'm using the generative color function in Illustrator to come up with some different color palettes for the character. I've found that while it's good, it's not great. Like it often comes up with color palettes that are a little too analogous. This is orange, but it might be a little bit too orange. So what I tried to do is find something that I liked as a baseline and a starting point, and then I went in and I would colorize different parts of the illustration, staying within the same warm kind of spectrum. You know, that's kind of a warm gray. I don't know if you can really tell that, but I didn't use a lot of blues on this. This stays comfortably on one side of the color wheel, but you know, I did think that it kind of helped to offset the overall kind of overly orange quality by adding some grays in. Here I'm colorizing the boiling water or oil, whatever you boil peanuts in. Probably water. Water and seasoning, I don't know. Never looked into it. I love eating them, never cooked them. So what I'm doing here is I'm adding a multiply effect, just basically taking an oval, adding a Gaussian blur and setting it to multiply. And what I'm trying to do is just add some ambient lighting, make it look like the boiling water itself is lighting the character. And one thing I really liked about doing this that's hilarious to me is the Peanut is engaging in a war cry, but he might also be yelling because he's a nut and his nuts are getting boiled. So I don't know, thought that was funny. Wouldn't be a Conan themed logo without the text from the Conan books and comic, or a very close facsimile. So I'm just putting that text onto a path, onto a kind of a round path around the character, playing with sizing, adding a drop shadow to give it a little bit of depth, and picking a color palette that mirrors the character. And obviously this is all sped up, but this illustration did go a little bit smoother and easier than others that I've worked on. There wasn't a lot of starts and stops. Didn't have to rethink a whole lot. It was just a lot of fun to work on, and it went smoothly, and the process was consistently fun, and I enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoyed watching me do it. If you have any questions about how I did this, comments or otherwise, feel free to leave them down below. I'd love a like and a subscribe, and I'll see you later. Take care, y'all.